right now, and now they can watch the video later. All right, so let's go back to sharing our screen, and boom, we've got this deal. So our pyramid, as we can kind of see there, the wider base is where we start. That's the first basic ideas, and then each level going up from there is just kind of the moving up a little bit more, until we kind of get up to the top where we've kind of started getting into racing. And at that point, then we can move on to bigger things. But this pyramid can basically guide us from beginner to racer. So starting off right down at the bottom, the biggest thing, most important all the time, is we want to make sure that we see everything around us. Right. So whether that's other boats, or whether that's the channel marker or the dock or one of the motorboats or whatever else might be going on, the osprey that's diving down, just kind of get into the idea of just kind of looking around and trying to notice everything. And right now we might not necessarily be able to or know what to do with it, but just kind of getting used to taking in all that information. Hey, look, there's the water over there is darker. I'm not really sure what that means yet, but I noticed that. And so one day when we realize, oh, hey, that darker water is a puff, and I can use it to get more boat speed. Even if at the time when you see that dark patch, you don't know that, at least you can go back later when somebody tells you about puffs and be like, oh yeah, I have seen those dark patches before, so that's what they are. Okay. So just kind of get used to just pulling in as much visual information as you can. Kind of your head is looking all around you. And then as we begin to go further up that pyramid, then we'll start beginning to know what to do with all that visual information we have. But whether you're the skipper or the crew, just always be watching around. All right, and the second thing on our bottom level of the pyramid would be make sure we know what the wind direction is. And so a lot of the times that's fairly simple. If we go out in kind of this medium-ish wind, it's real easy to feel it on your face and your hair, or it's blowing the sails very obviously in a particular way. But just kind of have that idea in your head, and that way when you're sailing upwind or when you're sailing downwind. Because as we begin to learn more about what we're doing with the boat, we know different things we need to be doing, whether we're sailing towards the wind or away from the wind, or whatever else might be going on. It's definitely helpful, especially in certain situations where it's not as easy to tell where the wind is coming from. So, maybe if it's very light, it's not always as easy to just sit in the boat and think, I feel the wind coming from over here. Sometimes we don't really feel it, right? So we might have to find other ways to figure out where this wind is coming from. So often the simplest way is to kind of look around at other boats nearby us, and we realize, oh, they're all pointing this direction and their sails are pulled in, and that's so we can kind of tell, they're going upwind, that's where the wind is coming from. Or maybe everybody's going in one direction and all the sails are out to the side, and we say, oh, okay, that means they're probably going downwind. And if you're not around any other sailboats, there's sometimes you can see maybe if the trees are blowing one way, or if you look around and you see maybe there's smoke from a chimney or a flag. But there's different things you can look at to try to figure out where that wind is coming from. One way I like to try to do it is I'll kind of turn my head around a little bit, and when I feel, you kind of feel the wind on one ear, or you might feel it on the other ear, but when you feel the wind coming in both your ears at the same time, that's when you're facing right directly into the wind. So that's a way that you can kind of figure out that angle pretty exactly. And so that's the base of our pyramid. Those are kind of the things we need to have before we really start building up above that. And kind of as we're building up through each level of this pyramid, what we're trying to do is get that level to be kind of at an automatic. We can just do it without really thinking about it. So, this bottom level, we're working on looking around, and at first we have to kind of focus on that, on making sure that we're not just looking this way, but we're also kind of turning our head that way and that way and that way every so often. And when we're first beginning, we have to really focus on which way is the wind coming from. And if I spin the boat around, I get turned around, and then I have to think again, where was the wind coming from again? But eventually you start getting automatic. Oh, yep, it's coming off the north side, or whatever it might be. So as you get those couple things automatic, then we can move up to the next level. And so now we're figuring out how to really effectively, turn our boat and how to get our sails in the perfect position. So when we're steering, there's, I guess, in this pyramid, we'll kind of go over, we can steer with the rudder, as I explicitly mentioned here, but then we can also use different things to steer the boat. And probably if you guys have been either at any of the green fruit practices, I probably mentioned it at least once, or if you've been listening into other Zoom sessions here, you probably know what are the other ways we can steer. But when we're first starting out, it's like it's our day one of sailing, or week one, or whatever the case may be. And right now, we just know that the rudder is the tiller is the handlebars, the rudder is the front wheel of our bike, if we use that analogy. And we're just figuring out how to make the boat turn that way. We have to. It's a weird sensation that we have to get used to, that the tiller steers opposite. So if we want to go left, we got to pull the tiller to the right. And so when we're first working on that, it gets we have to actually really think about that sometimes, and that's like right in the forefront of our brain. And so it's hard to focus on too many other things. And then also we have the sails, right? We want to make sure that our sails are working for us. And so right now we're just figuring out how to put them in the kind of the basic positions they need to be. So we're not worried about trimming a half inch or letting out a half inch. We're just saying, if your sails are luffing, they're not giving you any power. If they're flapping around, if they are pulled in so they're smooth again, they are giving you power. So that's kind of the level we're at here. And this is where we can kind of introduce the idea of the telltales, right? We kind of say the sails want to be at a certain angle to the wind kind of all the time. So we have our little boat on, or I guess you can't see, the whiteboard. But if we have if we've got a boat, our sails are pulled almost all the way in if we're heading upwind, and if we're heading downwind, they're let all the way out. And then anywhere in between upwind and downwind, they're in some percentage based on how you're pointed. And we want to make sure that they're not let too far out when they would start luffing, start flapping around. But we also want to make sure that they're not pulled too far in, right? So we can use the idea of the telltales, the little yarn things on the sails, and we basically say whichever telltales are fluttering, it means that the sail wants to go toward those telltales. So if we're sailing around and we realize that the inside telltales are fluttering around, then it means we want to pull that sail a little further in, right? If we're sailing and we realize that the outside telltales, the ones further away from us on the other side of the boat as the skipper, then we know the sail wants to go out. So if we're sailing around a buoy, we're going upwind and then we turn downwind. That's probably one of the most common things we see, is that we forget to let the sails out all the way. And so if we were looking at those telltales on the jib, if we had that jib still pulled in, we notice those telltales on the outside are really flapping around because that sail wants to go out away from the boat. So anytime we see those fluttering, we're going to let the sail go, or make the sail go towards whichever telltales are flapping around. The other thing that the telltales tell us is, remember, if we're sailing upwind, we're sailing close hauled, trying to get as close to the wind as we can, kind of almost like this line right here, right? Because we can't point straight up into the wind. But if we imagine the wind is coming straight down from the top of my screen, my boat can point at an angle, something like this, the side of this pyramid. And so if we're up there, this is kind of the line we want to be when we're sailing upwind. And if we sail any lower than that, if our angle looks more like this following my mouse, then that's not going to get us upwind as fast as another boat who is following this line. But what we also find is that if we go too high and we follow my mouse and we go above this line, now our boat is not it's not going as fast as it could. This line is kind of a trade-off between being able to move well and our sails being a little bit too close to the wind. So if we go above this line, then we start flapping around, and no matter how far we pull the sails in, they're not going to work for us. They're still going to be flapping, still going to be luffing. So at that point, that's when we would see the telltales on the inside flapping around, and we realize I can't pull the sail in anymore. The telltales on the inside are flapping around. That means the sail wants to come in, but I've already pulled it all the way in. That's when we know that we are above that close hauled line. We're going up into the no-go zone, and we have to come back down, follow that line. So that's kind of your second level of the pyramid, is we're just figuring out the kind of the basic straight line sailing, how to trim our sails for that, and then how to steer using the tiller that points the opposite way we're trying to go. And once we've got that, we're able to make the boat go where it needs to, go where we want to, as long as we're given enough time. Then we can move up to the third level, the green. And so we've got a couple different things going on here, I guess. One is that we're kind of getting to the point where we can put our sails in the right spot without really thinking too hard about it. We just know I'm going upwind, pull the sails in. And we've got used to steering with that tiller, steering with that rudder, and it doesn't have to be right in the forefront of our brain. We can just tell ourselves, I want to turn left, and we don't really have to think anymore about how to turn the tiller to make that happen. So we'll move up. We can say now the things that are in the front of our brain that we're thinking about now is we're keeping our boat flat. And so now we've got two people in the boat, right? We've got the skipper and the crew. And one of the crew's big jobs is that they have a lot of different places they can sit in the boat. They can be, in the middle, or they can be on the side opposite the skipper, or they can be on the side with the skipper. So they have a lot of different places they can move from side to side in the boat. And that's one of their big jobs, is to work to keep the boat nice and flat. So if you realize your boat is leaning toward the wind, we don't want that really to happen. And so the crew might have to move away from the wind to the leeward side. Or maybe we're sailing on a very windy day, and the wind is trying to blow the boat over. And so now the crew is going to move toward the wind with the skipper. And maybe it's enough wind that we have to, both of us, use those hiking straps that are, they're the cloth, the fabric straps tied into the bottom of the boat. And we're putting our feet underneath them, and we're leaning out towards the wind to balance the boat. And maybe it's it's enough wind that even though we're both hiking, the wind is still blowing the boat over. And now both as the skipper and the crew, we can use our sheets, the lines that are controlling our sail. We can start to ease those out and let the sail go out. And that way we're spilling some power. And then if the wind goes down a little bit, now because we've spilled that power, we're going to lean toward the wind. And so we can pull those sails back in. Or maybe we need to move back in off our hiking straps. But now we're learning how to think about all of that. What's the best way to move? Who's the best person to move, the skipper or the crew, to keep that boat flat? And we can start paying a little more attention to that. Next, we'll go over to the other side of the green line and learning how to set up our sails. So we've got the halyard that pulls up the jib, and when we pull this jib up our mast, that jib halyard is also, it's moving our mast a little bit, so we can figure out, do we want to pull that jib halyard on real tight, or can it be a little looser? And that depends on what the wind's like. We've got the downhaul, we've got the outhaul, we've got the boom vang, all these controls that can change the shape of the mainsail as it's up in the air. We can make it be more full, have kind of a belly and curve out to one side, or we can kind of pull it all flat like one big board, a big sheet, something like that. So we can change different things to make our sail be a different shape, or make our boat behave differently based on what sort of conditions we have, whether there's a lot of wind or less wind. If it's light wind, we'll make our sail be a different shape than if there's a lot of wind. And all this, we're not really talking specifics right now, just kind of the idea, but we're kind of learning how to do that for different situations. That way our boat can sail as smoothly and efficiently as possible in whatever weather we're in. So we're kind of learning how to learning all that new stuff. And then also, this was the best term I could come up with it, but maneuvers, meaning like when we do attack or when we do a jibe or whatever we might be doing where we have to move around in the boat. So we're learning how to do those a little more smoothly. So, when we have our tiller drill to learn how the skipper needs to switch that main sheet and that tiller behind him in the boat, that sort of stuff like that. And when the crew needs to pull their jib to the new side, use another jib sheet, all those different things that happen. Or when we are working to make our boat flat, how do we quickly move around and make sure we don't trip over our feet with the hiking straps? We kind of figure out where everything is on the floor and on the seats and stuff, so that we're not hurting ourselves and we're not falling or anything. So working through all that. So we're not necessarily looking at, I can do a roll tack now, but we can do a nice smooth tack without falling on our face or without dropping the main sheet, that sort of thing. And so all this, maybe all this stuff starts to take a little longer. Maybe our purple level only takes us a couple of hours, or maybe it's pretty quick, or maybe it is something that we get mostly automatic and then we can move on to the blue stuff, because purple and blue are kind of going to happen at the same time. We can't put you in a sailboat and have you not steering. But they for the most part, they'll happen fairly quickly. Probably in your first week or in your first couple of weeks, you're getting so that if you're not totally automatic with all this, it's getting pretty easy. But maybe all this stuff in the green level is taking a little longer. Maybe getting this stuff pretty automatic takes the whole high school season, your first season, something like that. So as we get a little higher up in the pyramid, it takes progressively longer to make that level become automatic for us. But once we do get this all working for us and we don't really have to think about it that much anymore, it's still, we're still thinking, I got to do this, but we don't have to sit there and just think through every single step, and it's taking everything in our brain. But once we get that, then we can start moving on to our yellow level, or orange, whatever color that is. And now we're another kind of word that is maybe not the best way to describe it, but it was the best way I could kind of break it down into a small phrase. We're going to steer small and we're going to trim small. So steering obviously being making the boat go where it wants to, or where we want it to, and trimming being changing our sails. But now we're figuring out, instead of pushing our tiller all the way over to the side of the boat, we're starting to realize that actually if I just push the tiller a little bit, if I take a little bit longer to turn the boat, it's actually my boat speed is gonna stay a lot higher. If I push that tiller all the way over to the side, I'm gonna turn pretty quick, but I'm also gonna really stop that boat from moving. I'm gonna have to pick up my speed again once I get through that turn. And when I'm moving my sails around, I'm not going to do a real big jerk, because that can make the air stop flowing over the sails for a little bit, and it has to reattach before it can give us power. Or when we are working on keeping our flat boat, and we realize we're both hiking, we have to ease the sails to still keep the boat flat. We're not just gonna dump the whole thing and then suddenly we realize that was too much and we have to jump into the boat to keep it from tipping over on us. But we learned that we can just ease it out a little bit, and that usually helps us out. So we're figuring out how to take all these kind of big jerky motions that are the correct motions. We're just maybe kind of overdoing them, and we're figuring out how to get them a little more fine-tuned so that we can be sailing a lot more efficiently as well. And so that again is going to take it's going to take more time. It takes some, even once we start racing and we're getting up to really high racing level, this sort of thing is still something that we can continue to improve. The next thing on our yellow level is we're going to be looking around for wind and looking around for boats. So remember, back from our very bottom level, we're working on just seeing everything around us, and we don't need to necessarily know what to do with it yet. But now we're starting to be able to use that information to say, hey, look, I see there is some wind over on this side, and maybe I'm starting to learn about some racing stuff, and so I know that more wind is more boat speed, and so maybe that's the side of the race course I want to go to. Or even if we're not even thinking in a racing context yet, we just see here's that puff coming to me, so I know it is going to try to blow my boat over, and I can kind of be prepared to make those moves that I will need to do to keep my boat flat. So that way the puff doesn't take me by surprise because I was able to look and see it coming. Or we're looking out for boats, and we see a boat is coming towards us, so we figure out what's the best way to avoid it so that I don't have to I don't have to just crash into attack all of a sudden to avoid him at the last second. I can kind of change my course just a little bit and stay out of his way. Or maybe we're learning about sailing right-of-way rules, and I realize I'm the one with right-of-way and he has to move for me. And so then if we see him coming from a far distance, we can give a call and say, hey, I'm right-of-way, I'm starboard, or I'm leeward, whatever the case may be. And that way he's got a little bit of warning, so he gets out of our way and he doesn't make it into a bad situation. But we're starting to be able to use this visual information that we have been working on gathering this whole time and use it to help us. And so again, both of these probably looking for things is it comes a little quicker, but certainly this figuring out how to make smaller movements for our steering and our sail trim is definitely going to be something that we continue to work on even as we do move up into racing. And then we get to kind of the tip of our pyramid before we are really calling ourselves real racers. We've got a couple things, and so another little interesting. There's just the best thing I can come up with is we're looking at the fancier maneuvers, right? So before we said we just want to be able to go through our tack, do it nice and smooth. We don't drop the main sheet, don't trip over the tiller or anything. We can get through it just fine. But now we've got a lot more control of our boat. All this is pretty automatic. We can make the boat do basically whatever we want, make it point wherever we want. And so now we can start looking at start learning all those different racing moves like the roll tacks and roll jibes, and rocking the boat or acceleration for the start line, that sort of thing. So we're not expecting to be really good at it yet, but we're learning what to do with the boat to make it happen. And so we're kind of starting to get into that. And so it's going to be all these basic things that we learned about setting up the sails and about steering that now we realize there's other things we can steer with. We can use the sails to steer. We can use the boat heel, which way the boat is learning, to help us steer. That we've picked all those things up along the way, and now we can put them into, oh cool, I can zoom in or zoom out. We can put them into doing all these different fancy racing roll tacks and stuff. And we're also able to kind of start making some tactical decisions. We're starting to learn about a little bit more about what we have to do to get around a race course, and we can look at where that wind is coming from and make those decisions and see the boats that are around the course and think of, I'm in bad air from this boat. He's taking some of my breeze, so I don't want to keep sailing right underneath him. I'm going to tack out and go somewhere else. But I don't want to go on the opposite side of the race course. I still want to be over here. So maybe I do a quick tack and go this way a little bit to get out of his bad air, and then come back and keep going this direction because this is where I want to be going. But we're able to start making those sorts of decisions. And so again, as we move further up the pyramid, this is stuff that we really never stop learning. We never get to a point where we say, all right, I have completed my tactical training. All those people that, everybody, all you guys that have been watching all these Zoom sessions, and I've been pulling up all these different books by all these different people, and none of us have ever met them, but they're very good sailors. But any one of them, if you were able to ask them, have you finished learning everything about sailing? They would definitely tell you that no, every time they go out racing, they learn something new. Um, so that's always stuff that we keep building on, right? There's never a particular end. We're just able to keep getting better and better. And I think that's one of the most interesting things about, that's one of the most fun things about sailing, is that you never do get to a point where you're like, well, there's nothing else to do. There's always something new and neat to figure out when you're going out sailing and going out racing against other people. But so that's our pyramid of greatness, I guess I called it, for going from knowing nothing to being able to pretty effectively race. So once we get up to this point, this is where we can say, hey, look, I'm ready to start racing for my high school team, and we'll get you out on the race course. All right, that is everything I had for now. Does anybody have any questions? Cool. And if not, that's totally fine. I think this is definitely a neat opportunity to have kind of this Green Fleet special or Green Fleet specific session. So we'll see about we'll keep doing this. Maybe just once a week, or maybe if we decide that it'd be helpful 2 times a week, we'll see about making that happen. But certainly in this time when we're not able to get out on the water, we will keep doing as all the learning that we can, and it'll be we'll come out with a lot more knowledge than if we just sat in our house. All right, so hopefully I will see all of you tomorrow at 3 for our normal everybody Zoom session, and I will get this put up on the website for anybody who did miss it and was interested in seeing it. And other than that, that's all I've got. So hopefully we'll see you tomorrow at 3.